Welcome, dear listener, to Candlelight Mysteries, where every whisper hides a truth and every shadow conceals a secret. Tonight we begin a new tale within our quiet circle of stories, and we call it What If Miss Marple and Hercule Poirot Met at the Midnight Express. A light rain moves across street, Mary Mead as a soft curtain, and its gentle rhythm settles over tidy roofs and narrow lanes. Miss Marple sits near her small lamp, with her knitting placed beside a warm cup, and her calm presence guides the tone of our journey. The village holds its usual charm, yet a faint shift moves through, the air like steam rising from fresh tea. People speak with care, a door closes with a thoughtful touch, and a rumour starts its slow path from one neighbour to the next. These small changes invite us deeper into the heart of this new mystery, and each detail waits for a patient ear. We share this calm space with you tonight, and we wonder where you might be listening from this evening. Perhaps you rest near a quiet window, or maybe you sit with a warm drink as the room settles around you. This new tale meets you gently, and its steady rhythm hopes to bring a soft comfort. And now, dear listener, we turn to Chapter 1, where our mystery properly begins. Chapter 1. A Quiet Visitor in the Rain. Evening rain moved across Street Mary Mead with a steady hush. Lamps glowed behind lace curtains, and gentle light touched the wet roads. The village felt wrapped in a soft calm that settled like a shawl. Most windows stayed closed, yet a quiet watchfulness filled the air. Miss Marple sat near her small lamp with her knitting resting beside a warm cup. She looked through the rain-marked pane and noticed the faint outline of a car moving slowly. Its headlights swept across the hedges in a patient rhythm. Visitors arrived sometimes, though their timing often carried meaning. The car stopped near the vicarage gate. A man stepped out with great care, avoiding the deeper puddles. He adjusted his hat and looked up at the houses as if studying a map made of rooftops. Miss Marple noted the gesture with a small nod. Villagers spoke of rain as a blessing, for it kept gossip indoors. Yet whispers often found paths, even through stormy evenings. A single stranger stepping from a late car could stir such pathways easily. Miss Marple felt the first tug of curiosity rise. The man walked with measured precision. He carried a neat suitcase that seemed polished despite the wet air. His shoes caught Miss Marple's attention, for they shone in a way few travellers managed. She saw intention in the shine. He knocked at the vicarage door. The knock held confidence, though it remained polite. A soft pause followed before light filled the doorway, and the vicar's outline appeared. The man bowed slightly and spoke with gentle courtesy. Rain softened their words, but the tone carried warm civility. The vicar welcomed him inside at once. Miss Marple leaned back in her chair with a thoughtful breath. She recognized the man's manner before she knew his name. Later, as the rain eased, Mrs. Price Ridley passed Miss Marple's garden gate. She walked quickly but slowed enough to share her thoughts. She mentioned the stranger with a whisper that carried curiosity. Miss Marple heard the familiar rise of local interest. Mr. Petherick joined her, drawn by the same topic. He enjoyed village puzzles more than he admitted. They both tried to recall whether anyone expected a visitor at the vicarage. Neither found a clear answer. Their voices wove with the soft drizzle. Miss Marple listened with care, for rumours often held useful threads. She asked gentle questions that nudged small details free. Mrs. Price Ridley remembered the man's accent. Mr. Petherick noted the elegant cut of his coat. Miss Marple stored these pieces quietly. She knew the value of early impressions. Some clues began as simple remarks offered near garden paths. Her gaze returned to the vicarage window, where two silhouettes moved in steady conversation. She wondered about the stranger's purpose. Few people visited the vicarage unannounced on rainy evenings. Fewer still did so with such polished composure. She sensed a story forming, though its outline remained faint. The village often learned of events through gentle drift rather than sudden news. A look traded at the grocer, a small comment near the post office. Miss Marple knew the pattern well. She expected the next whisper by morning. As she prepared her tea, She reflected on the stranger's careful steps. They lacked the hesitation of a lost traveler. They held knowledge of destination. She found that more telling than the suitcase or the hat. Miss Marple carried her tea to her favorite chair and listened to the rain settle. In its quiet rhythm, she heard the steady pulse of village life. People revealed more in stillness than in noise. She allowed the evening to speak in its own time. After some minutes, she noticed another figure walking along the lane. It was 45 Dolly Bantry. Drawn by curiosity she could not hide, Dolly paused near the hedge and peered toward the vicarage with keen interest. Miss Marple smiled at the familiar sight. Dolly knocked on Miss Marple's door with soft insistence. Miss Marple welcomed her inside at once. Dolly removed her damp coat and shook her head with lively wonder. She asked if Miss Marple had seen the stranger arrive. Miss Marple poured another cup of tea. She described only what she observed, allowing Dolly to draw her own path through the tale. Dolly speculated freely, suggesting the man might be a writer or a Rafi, foreign scholar. Miss Marple listened with polite warmth. They spoke in gentle tones as the village settled. Through their talk, Miss Marple noticed how often Dolly returned to the man's posture. That detail seemed to interest her most. Some instincts brushed truth more closely than people realized. Miss Marple agreed the posture mattered. It carried confidence without pride. It suggested long practice in precise movement. She recalled another clue she had gathered. When the man knocked on the door, he used his knuckle in a way that avoided damp wood. This small gesture revealed habit, not momentary caution. She did not share the thought yet, but she placed it carefully with the others. She found that people spoke more openly when she saved her conclusions for later. Dolly asked if she planned to visit the vicarage the next morning. Miss Marple said she might if the moment felt suitable. She never hurried such meetings. Information flowed best through patience. Dolly admired her restraint. When Dolly left, the rain had dwindled to a fine mist. Miss Marple watched her walk away with steady steps. The evening felt lighter, though the mystery had only begun. She sensed the stranger held a reason for being here. She glanced once more at the quiet lane. She saw no movement now. The night wrapped itself around the village with familiar ease. Yet, beneath its calm surface, a new thread waited to be pulled. Miss Marple returned to her chair and rested her hands on her lap. She knew mysteries seldom announced themselves loudly. They entered through simple knocks, measured footsteps, and polished shoes. Her eyes closed briefly as she traced each detail again. In the soft hush that followed, she felt certain the visitor carried significance. She had seen curiosity behind the stranger's gaze. She wondered what he sought and why his path led here. The questions rested lightly, asking only for time. The rain eased fully, leaving the world washed and still. Miss Marple finished her tea and prepared for bed. She carried a sense of steady interest. With her, change often began with quiet moments such as these. The village would respond in its own rhythm. Morning arrived clear and pale, with thin light sliding over the chimneys. The rain had rinsed the village clean. Gardens held droplets on every leaf. Paths shone with faint brightness. Miss Marple woke early, as she often did. She set water to boil and moved with practiced ease about her small kitchen. The quiet of morning allowed her thoughts to settle. They returned at once to the previous night. She pictured the polished shoes and the careful knock. She recalled the measured bow at the vicarage door. These details formed a pattern. It waited to be named. Outside, a milk cart rattled past. The driver exchanged a greeting with a woman carrying a basket. Miss Marple heard their voices drift through her open window. The stranger had already reached the day's first conversation. She heard only a few words. Something about a foreign gentleman, something about fine manners. The tone carried both admiration and unease. Newness always stirred both. After breakfast, Miss Marple chose her hat and coat. She selected a simple brooch, nothing too bright. Her visits never seemed hurried. They appeared as natural as the day's slow turn. That helped people speak freely. The path to the vicarage felt familiar under her feet. Roses leaned over garden walls. A cat watched from a doorstep. The village seemed unchanged, yet expectation touched each corner. News had travelled quickly. Near the lane, she met Mrs. Price Ridley again. The lady stopped at once, eager to share what little she knew. She whispered that the stranger had come from London. She said he carried himself like someone important. Miss Marple listened, nodding at the right moments. She asked whether anyone knew his name. Mrs. Price Ridley hesitated, then admitted she did not. She only knew the vicar had seemed honoured to receive him. This small fact interested Miss Marple. The vicar welcomed many, but he rarely looked honoured. She tucked the remark beside last night's observations. Together, they formed a more precise impression. When she reached the vicarage gate, she paused to adjust her glove. She allowed herself one brief glance at the windows. Movement flickered behind the glass. A figure crossed the sitting room with measured steps. She knocked gently. The door opened to reveal Griselda, lively and bright even in morning light. Griselda greeted Miss Marple with genuine warmth. She seemed excited rather than anxious. "Do come in," she said. "We have a very interesting guest." Miss Marple's eyes softened with mild amusement. Interesting meant many things in Street Mary Mead. She entered the hall, noting the placement of an extra coat on the stand. It was neat and of excellent cloth. Griselda led her to the sitting room. There, near the hearth, stood the stranger. In daylight, his features appeared more distinct. A neat moustache, dark eyes, and a compact build. His stance suggested balance and control. The vicar introduced them with evident pleasure. "Miss Marple, may I present Monsieur Hercule Poirot?" Poirot bowed slightly. His gaze rested on Miss Marple with clear interest. She returned his look with gentle calm. She recognized his name, of course. Stories of his work had reached even their quiet village. "It is a great honor," she said softly. "We hear of you sometimes, even here." Poirot smiled. "And I, mademoiselle, have heard of you, a lady who observes much and speaks little." The remark surprised the vicar. He looked between them with raised brows. Miss Marple simply folded her hands more neatly. Inside, she marked this as a significant clue. Poirot had not arrived entirely uninformed. Griselda offered tea and moved about with graceful energy. Cups were placed, spoons rested, and biscuits arranged. The small rituals of hospitality helped everyone settle. Miss Marple used such moments to watch quietly. Poirot accepted his cup but barely sipped. His gaze drifted to the window, then back to her. She could almost see his thoughts arranging themselves. He seemed to measure not only the room, but its people. "The countryside," he said. "It hides many little secrets, I think." The vicar laughed gently and agreed. He mentioned recent parish matters, all safely ordinary. Poirot listened with polite attention. Miss Marple noted that his interest sharpened whenever the word train appeared. Griselda described a recent trip to town, which had involved a crowded carriage. She laughed about luggage and delays. At the word luggage, Poirot's fingers tightened ever so slightly on his cup. Miss Marple saw the motion. It was small, almost nothing, yet it revealed a path. Something about luggage and trains lay close to his purpose. She felt certain of that. She asked a simple question. "Did you come here straight from London, Monsieur Poirot, or did your journey take a more complex route?" Poirot's eyes brightened. He appreciated direct curiosity. "I arrived on a rather interesting train, mademoiselle, the Midnight Express." The vicar remarked on the romantic sound of the name. Griselda wondered if it was not very tiring. Poirot answered pleasantly, yet Miss Marple sensed deeper layers. His tone held the weight of unspoken detail. "A journey may be tiring," he said, "when something on the train does not belong where it is." The vicar looked puzzled. Griselda glanced at Miss Marple, intrigued. Miss Marple waited, allowing the silence to open space. Poirot filled it, as she expected. "There was a small incident," he continued, "a piece of jewelry that did not reach its proper destination." Miss Marple's eyes remained mild, though her thoughts grew sharper. "How very unfortunate," she said. People feel such losses keenly. Yes, Poirot replied, and sometimes others feel them too, for different reasons. He did not explain further, but the room now held a quiet tension. A crime, then, lay behind his visit. A missing piece of jewelry, likely valuable, and perhaps a traveller not yet safely distant. Miss Marple noticed a folded ticket stub on the table beside his suitcase. It lay partly concealed by a newspaper. The corner showed a stamped date. She recognized it as yesterday's. His journey had been very recent. Griselda rose to fetch more hot water. The vicar followed her, leaving the door slightly ajar. Their voices drifted away toward the kitchen. The room now held only Poirot and Miss Marple. For a few moments, neither spoke. They regarded each other with polite curiosity. The quiet felt companionable rather than strained. Two minds measured the same space from different angles. At last, Poirot inclined his head. "You see many things, I think, Miss Marple. I am afraid I have very little to do," she answered. "It leaves one rather at the mercy of observation." He gave a soft sound that might have been amusement. "Then perhaps you will allow me to share a puzzle. It is small, but it concerns that same train." She did not press him. "If you feel it might help to speak of it," she said, "I am sure we can listen." He studied her face. Whatever he saw there seemed to reassure him. "On the Midnight Express," he said, "something disappeared, but I believe not everything that disappeared belonged to its rightful owner." Miss Marple tilted her head slightly. "Then some loss may not be quite what it appears." "Just so," Poirot replied. Footsteps and clinking cups approached again. Their private exchange slipped back beneath the smooth surface of general conversation. Yet a new understanding had formed between them. Both recognized the beginning of shared work. When Miss Marple finally took her leave, the sun had risen higher. The day felt clearer, yet more complex. She walked slowly down the vicarage path, reviewing each word and gesture: a polished suitcase, a ticket stub, a tightening hand at the mention of luggage, a train at midnight where something vanished, and now Hercule Poirot in Street Mary Mead. She did not know yet why the trail led here, but she trusted that it did. Patterns did not cross such distances without reason. Her part, she knew, would involve listening to the village breathe. As she passed a hedge near the lane, she heard voices already sharing fragments of news. Someone mentioned a famous detective. Someone else spoke of a mysterious train. Gossip had begun its quiet work. Miss Marple smiled faintly. She understood that every rumor carried both noise and signal. Her task would be to separate one from the other. She looked back once toward the vicarage. Somewhere inside, Poirot no doubt arranged his clues with neat precision. She, too, arranged hers, though of a different kind. Together, perhaps, they might find a truth neither could reach alone. Chapter 2. Murmurs at the Bluefinch Cafe. Morning light settled warmly over Street Mary Mead as villagers moved about their daily errands. The air felt fresh after the rain, and the roads carried a soft gleam. Leaves trembled gently in the breeze. The village stirred with quiet purpose. Miss Marple walked at a steady pace toward the Bluefinch Cafe, known for warm scones and friendly gossip. She preferred mornings there, when talk flowed easily and small truths drifted to the surface. The cafe door opened with its usual soft chime. She stepped inside with calm familiarity. The cafe felt welcoming, with soft colors and the scent of fresh tea. A few early customers occupied their favorite seats. Dolly Bantry waved her over at once. Miss Marple offered a gentle smile and joined her. "You heard, of course," Dolly whispered. "Everyone is talking." Miss Marple folded her gloves and placed them neatly on the table. "News travels quickly," she said, "even when little is known." Dolly leaned closer. "They say the man is famous. They say he solves mysteries." Miss Marple allowed a mild expression. "It does appear he has that reputation." Before Dolly could continue, the cafe door opened again. Monsieur Hercule Poirot stepped inside with thoughtful poise. His gaze swept the room without urgency. People turned subtly, drawn to him by the simple force of presence. He selected a small table near the window. Mrs. Hartnell nudged Mrs. Price Ridley. Mr. Petherick adjusted his spectacles. The soft hum of conversation rose. Gossip swirled like gentle steam. Miss Marple studied the reactions. People spoke in quieter tones, yet every sentence carried curiosity. Words like detective, London, and train floated in gentle fragments. Poirot pretended not to notice, though his eyes missed very little. Dolly whispered again, "Do you think he came here for a case?" Miss Marple answered softly, "People seldom travel far without purpose." Dolly's eyes widened with delight. "Then something has happened. Or perhaps," Miss Marple said, "something is about to." Mrs. Hartnell approached. Poirot with her usual boldness. She asked if he preferred tea or something stronger. Poirot requested tea with simple politeness. Miss Marple watched his manner, noting how he placed his cup precisely in front of him. His gaze drifted toward the counter where a new headline rested. A newspaper lay open, showing a story about a theft on the midnight express. It reported a missing brooch and a passenger who left the train early. Poirot's eyes paused on the lower lines. Miss Marple caught the direction of his attention. A clue often appeared not in words, but in what people chose to look at. She glanced at the same headline briefly, then returned to her tea. Mrs. Price Ridley lowered her voice as she addressed Dolly Bantry. "The article says the thief must be clever." Dolly nodded. "Clever enough to trouble the great Monsieur Poirot," Miss Marple added gently. "Sometimes cleverness is not the whole story. Circumstance can play its part too." Poirot stirred his tea. He took one small sip, then rested the spoon with exact alignment. This small gesture spoke of habit, not affectation. Miss Marple recognized an organized mind behind each movement. A young server passed by with a tray of warm bread. He nearly stumbled near Poirot's table. Poirot steadied the tray with swift reflex. The boy thanked him with shy relief. Poirot smiled encouragingly. Miss Marple saw the boy's eyes widen as he realized whom he had nearly spilled upon. The boy whispered to a colleague at once. Another ripple of gossip moved through the room. Dolly leaned close again. "He moves so neatly, like a dancer." Miss Marple nodded. "Some people learn precision early. It becomes second nature." "Do you think he noticed everyone staring?" "He has noticed far more than that, I believe." Poirot's gaze moved across the café with polite interest. He examined the pastries, the tables, and the rack of letters near the door. His eyes paused on Miss Marple briefly. She offered him a small acknowledging nod. He returned it with courteous warmth. The server arrived with more tea. Miss Marple thanked him. The pot clinked softly on the table. Through the steam, she considered Poirot's subtle movements. She wondered which detail carried the weight of his purpose. Near the counter, a cluster of villagers tried to read the newspaper at the same time. Mr. Petherick attempted to interpret the article with great authority. He claimed he understood jewelry thefts well. Mrs. Hartnell doubted this, but let him speak. Their conversation drifted toward talk of strangers on trains. Someone mentioned a person with a heavy case. Another claimed the inspector had already visited the station. Miss Marple listened to the scattered rumors, careful not to accept any piece before it settled. Poirot listened too, though he kept his eyes on the window. He seemed to measure the accuracy of each rumor through silence rather than correction. Miss Marple admired this restraint. Soon, Dolly turned her attention back to Miss Marple. "You said he had purpose. Do you think he expects help?" "Help sometimes appears in unlikely places," Miss Marple said gently. "From you, perhaps." Miss Marple smiled modestly. "I only notice small things." At that moment, Poirot rose from his seat. He approached their table with graceful control. The café's chatter softened around him. "Mademoiselle Marple," he said with quiet respect, "may I join you for a moment?" "Of course," she replied. "Please sit." Poirot settled in the chair beside them. He thanked Dolly for her warm smile. Dolly straightened, thrilled by his attention. "I find your village charming," Poirot said. "So calm, so peaceful." Dolly laughed. "It is peaceful, yes, except when something interesting happens." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "And yet, sometimes the most peaceful places hold the most delicate clues." Miss Marple asked, "Do you seek clues here, Monsieur Poirot?" He paused before speaking. "One must look everywhere, mademoiselle, even in quiet places, especially in quiet places." A soft gust of curiosity passed through the cafe. People leaned slightly closer, hoping to hear more. Poirot's eyes shifted to Miss Marple with subtle intention. "May I ask," he said, "if you have travelled by train lately?" Miss Marple answered calmly, "I have not this week." "Ah," Poirot said, "then perhaps you see other travellers, some who appear quite tired, some who guard their belongings with unusual care." Miss Marple understood his direction. "Such behaviour speaks loudly," she said. Poirot smiled. "It does indeed, sometimes louder than words." A faint silence followed. It held the weight of developing thought. Dolly looked between them with eager curiosity. Poirot stood again. "Thank you for your company. I believe our paths may continue to cross." Miss Marple inclined her head. "I expect they might." He left the cafe with quiet composure. Every eye followed him. Miss Marple watched him vanish around the corner before, returning to her cooling tea. Villagers whispered new theories at once. Someone said he must have come to question someone. Another insisted the thief was hiding in the village. Miss Marple listened politely but held her thoughts close. She reviewed the morning's moments, his glances, his posture, the way he paused at the newspaper. He carried knowledge he had not yet shared. His purpose would reveal itself soon enough. Dolly leaned forward. "Well, what do you make of it?" Miss Marple looked out the window, where sunlight touched the road. "I believe," she said softly, "that Monsieur Poirot has found something worth searching for." The cafe hummed with restless curiosity. The village prepared for whatever tale might follow. Miss Marple folded her gloves again and stood. Outside, the air felt sharper, as though holding its breath. She walked slowly toward the lane, watching how the village gathered and scattered in gentle patterns. Clues lived among these movements. She sensed another was already forming nearby. Miss Marple walked slowly down the main road after leaving the cafe. Sunlight filtered through thinning clouds, creating gentle patterns across the pavement. Birds called from the hedges with soft morning notes. The village felt settled, yet a hint of tension lingered beneath its calm surface. She paused near the grocer's window. Villagers clustered there, drawn to a fresh newspaper delivered minutes earlier. The article about the Midnight Express had moved to a new position on the front page. People leaned close, reading every line with earnest enthusiasm. Miss Marple stepped nearer to hear the tone of their voices. Mr. Petherick claimed the thief must have left the train in a hurry. Mrs. Price Ridley insisted the thief looked respectable. Mrs. Hartnell believed the thief hid the brooch in a hollowed book. None seemed fully confident. Miss Marple quietly listened. Hasty explanations often revealed more about the speaker than the subject. She studied their expressions and noted which details they lingered upon. People repeated certain words more than others. Behind them, the baker emerged, carrying a tray of rolls. He set them near the door and joined the conversation. He said a stranger had visited the station the previous evening, though no one knew who he was. Miss Marple followed this remark with careful interest. She asked gently, "Did he arrive or depart?" The baker shrugged. "Hard to say." He stood near the luggage trolley, looked uneasy. Uneasy in what way? He kept turning his head, as if expecting someone. Miss Marple stored the detail with quiet calm. People acting under strain often exposed truth through restless gestures. She thanked the baker and continued her walk along the lane. The post office stood ahead. A small group gathered outside as the day's letters were sorted. Miss Marple joined them with natural ease. She noticed an unfamiliar envelope on the counter addressed to the vicarage. The handwriting appeared precise, almost artistic. Miss Marple asked the postmistress whether the letter had come on the early train. The postmistress nodded, She said it smelled faintly of lavender, which rarely came from the usual senders. Such scents marked personal significance rather than routine business. Miss Marple observed the envelope again. Poirot might have seen it when he left the cafe. She wondered if he recognized the handwriting, or perhaps he expected such correspondence. Many clues travelled quietly through the mail. The postmistress handed Miss Marple her own letter. Miss Marple thanked her and stepped outside, pausing to examine the village with thoughtful eyes. Every corner seemed to hold a quiet movement. People carried fragments of the same mystery without knowing it. She walked toward the green where benches circled an active old oak tree. Children played nearby, watched by a pair of mothers exchanging soft conversation. A stray dog wandered close to the children and sniffed their lunch bags. The mothers laughed and drew the children nearer. Miss Marple sat on a bench near the edge of the green. From this vantage point, she could observe the street, the post office, and anyone passing by. She found such moments useful for gathering subtle impressions. A figure soon approached from the direction of the vicarage. It was Monsieur Poirot, walking with measured steps, hands clasped behind him. His gaze swept the area. When he noticed her, he smiled and altered his course to join her. "Mademoiselle Marple," he said, "I find you again where the village breathes most clearly." Miss Marple returned the smile. "And you, Monsieur Poirot, seem to enjoy our fresh morning air." Poirot sat at a respectful distance. "I find it most agreeable and most instructive." She waited patiently. Poirot glanced toward the post office. His eyes revealed quiet thought. "You observe the letter on the counter," he said gently. "I do," she replied. "It carries a scent not common here." Poirot nodded. "And scents, they tell stories, far more honest than people," Miss Marple agreed. "Lavender usually suggests personal ties or valued memory." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "You think it relates to the Midnight Express matter?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she watched a bicycle pass by, ridden by a young man carrying a bundle of papers. She followed its path until it vanished around a corner. Then she said, "I think every unexpected detail deserves attention. Letters can travel strange journeys. Some even follow other travelers." Poirot considered her words. "Yes," he said, "they follow like shadows." They sat quietly for a moment. The calm around them deepened. Miss Marple sensed he wished to share something, yet hesitated to speak fully. At last he said, "You understand people very well." "People show themselves," she answered, "if one looks kindly and with patience." Poirot seemed pleased. "Then perhaps you noticed something in the cafe earlier, a small detail." Miss Marple looked toward the cafe roof, visible behind the distant rooftops. "Many details," she said, "but perhaps one in particular." Poirot studied her expression, searching for the thread she recognized. "The boy with the tray," he said finally. "He nearly fell." "Yes," she replied, "but he avoided falling." Poirot nodded. "Exactly. And he avoided falling because he saw something which startled him." Miss Marple recalled the moment. The boy's glance had shifted rapidly toward Poirot's table. Not toward Poirot himself, but toward the newspaper lying beside him. "What did he see?" Miss Marple asked softly. Poirot leaned slightly closer. "A photograph," he said, "small, in the bottom corner." Miss Marple remembered the article's layout, a small image of the stolen brooch, framed by a short caption. The boy must have recognized it. "Children observe sharply," she said. "Ah," Poirot replied, "but he is not a child, he is nearly a man." Miss Marple smiled. "Near enough that he knows fear, young enough that he hides it poorly." Poirot agreed. He looked at the brooch as if he had seen it before. Miss Marple folded her hands. "Then perhaps he has." A breeze shifted the leaves of the oak above them. Sunlight danced across the path. Poirot watched the breeze with thoughtful eyes. "You think the boy knows something," he said quietly. "I think," Miss Marple replied, "that he knows someone who knows something." Poirot considered this. He looked at the children playing near the green, then the post office, then at the road where the bicycle had passed. He said nothing, yet his mind moved swiftly. Miss Marple rose from the seacade bench. Poirot stood as well. He offered her a slight bow. "I thank you," he said, "for your insight." She responded with gentle calm. "I only follow the pattern of people. You follow the pattern of motive." Poirot smiled warmly. "Perhaps we follow the same pattern from different sides." Miss Marple began her walk home, moving with her usual unhurried steps. She sensed Poirot watched her for a moment before turning toward the station road. The morning shifted toward midday. The breeze freshened. The village carried its calm rhythm once more. Yet beneath this rhythm, something new stirred. A clue had formed quietly. It waited for the right moment to surface. Miss Marple walked on, trusting that time would reveal its shape. She had seen enough to know the mystery pressed gently toward its next reveal. Chapter 3. The Tale of the Midnight Express. The village library welcomed the morning with a gentle hush. Sunlight drifted through tall windows and settled across long rows of books. Dust shimmered in the beams like faint stars. The stillness invited quiet thought. Miss Marple entered with soft steps, carrying a small list of titles she intended to borrow. She enjoyed the library's calm pace, where every sound felt respectful. The card catalogue clicked lightly as she searched for an old gardening reference. She sensed someone else moving nearby. Monsieur Poirot stood in a corner between two tall shelves. He held a slim timetable book in his hands. His posture reflected steady purpose. He lifted his gaze when he sensed her presence. "Mademoiselle Marple," he said warmly, "you seek knowledge early today." She smiled gently. "A simple errand. And yourself, Monsieur Poirot?" He held up the timetable. "I find old schedules most techily enlightening." The librarian, Mrs. Weatherby, approached with careful steps. She wore her usual steel spectacles and carried a stack of returned books pressed against her chest. Her expression softened when she saw Miss Marple. Her voice dropped as she greeted them both. "It is not often we receive such illustrious company," she whispered. Poirot inclined his head modestly. "I am only a reader today." Mrs. Weatherby chuckled. "Even readers follow clues. Books often help them." Miss Marple watched Poirot's reaction to those words. He did not deny their truth. Instead, he opened the timetable and studied a folded page. Miss Marple caught a glimpse of a marked line. It showed the route of the Midnight Express. "Such trains carry many stories," Miss Marple said. Poirot looked up. "They do? Some pleasant, some less pleasant." Mrs. Weatherby adjusted her glasses. "I heard the Midnight Express had some excitement recently," she said casually. "Something went missing, did it not?" Poirot answered with measured calm. "A small item of value. A brooch, I believe," she added quietly. "Yes," Poirot said. "Quite distinctive." Miss Marple noticed Poirot's fingers tightened slightly on the timetable's spine. A delicate clue. She sensed the story pressed closer to the village than before. Mrs. Weatherby leaned in just a little. "My cousin works on the railway line," he said. The inspector questioned the staff at the early station. Poirot nodded. "They hoped. Someone saw a passenger leave unexpectedly." "And did they?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, "but people often see only what they expect." Miss Marple found that remark interesting. She considered how easily the village accepted familiar patterns. Strangers rarely entered these patterns without causing quiet ripples. Poirot closed the timetable with a soft snap. Miss Marple watched him place it gently on the table. He took another book from the shelf and held it thoughtfully. "Timetables can be misleading," he said. "They show only intended journeys." Miss Marple nodded. "The actual journeys depend on people." "Just so." Their voices remained low, fitting the library's gentle rhythm. Mrs. Weatherby moved away to shelve books. The echo of her footsteps faded between the tall rows. Miss Marple stepped closer to Poirot. She sensed he wished to share something. His eyes held quiet weight. "You wonder why I follow this trail," he said softly. "I do," she replied, "but only insofar as you wish to speak of it." Poirot hesitated. His gaze drifted across the shelves, as if seeking a starting point. "On the Midnight Express," he began, "a lady carried a brooch of considerable sentimental value. She travelled alone." Miss Marple nodded. "That makes such items more vulnerable." "Indeed," Poirot said. "She placed the brooch in a small velvet case. She kept it close. She kept it close. And yet it vanished." "Yes." Poirot opened the second book, though he did not read from it. He seemed to use it only to steady his thoughts. "The lady awoke to find the brooch gone," he continued. "The case lay open beside her. No sign of force, no disturbance." Miss Marple considered this. "Someone acted very quietly." "Very quietly," he agreed. Mrs. Weatherby's voice rose faintly from the other aisle as she greeted a visitor. Miss Marple and Poirot remained in their small corner, surrounded by the soft scent of old paper. Poirot lowered his voice further. "There was one more detail. The lady said she noticed a man in the corridor during the night. He carried a heavy case." Miss Marple looked thoughtful. "Many travellers carry heavy cases, but not all guard them with such fear," Poirot said, "and not all leave the train early without explanation." She understood the implication. The man disappeared before the train reached its final stop. "Yes." Miss Marple allowed a short silence to settle between them. Poirot watched her carefully, as though waiting to see which thread she selected. She asked, "And you followed him here?" He did not answer directly. "I followed a possibility," he said. "The man purchased something from a small shop near the early station, something wrapped in brown paper." Miss Marple recalled the baker's story from that morning. A stranger standing near the luggage trolley, uneasy, turning his head. "A very small village," she said, "not unlike ours." Poirot nodded. "Clues travel through such one pie, places like whispers carried by the wind." Miss Marple reached for a gardening book, though her attention stayed with the conversation. "You believe the shopkeeper remembered him?" "Perhaps," Poirot replied. The shopkeeper described a dent on the man's sleeve. Miss Marple froze subtly. She recalled seeing a similar dent on the coat of the silent boarder at the Three Lanterns Inn, a very small dent, almost hidden. "That is a useful detail," she said softly. Poirot noticed her tone shift. "You know something?" he said quietly. "I know someone," she answered. Poirot waited with composed patience. He did not press her. Miss Marple respected this restraint. "There is a new boarder at the inn," she said. "He arrived without much luggage, except for one case he protects with great care." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "The case is heavy." "It looks heavy," she replied. "He keeps it near him even while dining." Poirot closed the book gently. "Then it is time we learn more about this boarder." Miss Marple nodded, carefully. "Always carefully," Poirot said. Mrs. Weatherby returned with a smile. "I hope you found what you needed," she said. Poirot straightened. "Yes, madame, quite a few things." Miss Marple took her books from the counter. Poirot thanked Mrs. Weatherby. Together they stepped into the sunlight outside the library. The air felt warm and calm, yet the ground beneath the mystery shifted. People walked by with their baskets and errands. None realized. Two detectives now understood the trail more clearly. Miss Marple paused at the edge of the path. Poirot stopped beside her. They exchanged a thoughtful look, each recognizing the other's growing role. "One sees much in libraries," Miss Marple said. Poirot nodded. "And even more?" "In quiet conversations." They parted ways, though both moved with purpose. The next steps awaited them at the inn. Miss Marple walked a short distance from the library before pausing near a flowering hedge. The air held the faint sweetness of late blossoms. Bees drifted lazily between petals. Her thoughts, however, moved with sharper clarity. Poirot stepped out beside her, adjusting his hat as he observed the quiet street. People passed with gentle greetings. None showed urgency. Yet Miss Marple sensed a deeper rhythm, almost like footsteps trailing inside a hidden corridor. "You consider the boarder at the inn," Poirot said softly. Miss Marple nodded. "He troubles me, though he reveals so little." "Silence can be loud," Poirot remarked. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "It often is." They walked together toward the green. Their pace remained slow, giving space for thought. The village looked peaceful, but such peace often masked subtle tension. Miss Marple could almost feel it brushing her sleeve. Poirot halted briefly at a small shop window. Inside, various household goods sat neatly arranged. A row of brushes rested beside packets of soap. A few folded newspapers lay near the counter. He studied the scene with thoughtful eyes. "I observe," he said, "that this shop receives the early train's deliveries." Miss Marple looked at the crates near the door. "Yes, they arrive each morning." Poirot touched a wooden crate lightly. Then letters, parcels, even small packages passed through this very place. "And perhaps," Miss Marple added, "certain people too." Poirot turned to her with respectful admiration. "You think along the same line." "I think," she said gently, "that people often repeat their habits, even when hiding." They resumed their walk. A group of children played hopscotch near the church wall. Their laughter filled the air with light cheer. Yet one child sat apart on the steps, watching the others quietly. Miss Marple noticed him at once. He was the same boy who carried tea at the cafe earlier. She approached him slowly. He lowered his gaze, as though embarrassed to be seen. "Good morning," Miss Marple said kindly. "Morning, miss," he replied softly. Poirot offered him a gentle nod. "You work very well at the cafe, my friend." The boy shifted uncomfortably. "I try, sir." "You did. More than try," Poirot said. "You saved a tray from disaster." The boy flushed. "I almost dropped it." Miss Marple knelt slightly to meet his eyes. "Only because you noticed something." The boy swallowed. "I didn't mean to stare." Poirot kept his tone calm and warm. "It is good to see. Observation is important, even for young men." The boy's eyes flickered with a mix of pride and fear. Miss Marple recognized that blend. Something weighed upon him. "Did the photograph trouble you?" she asked softly. The boy hesitated a bit. "Why?" Poirot asked gently. The boy glanced toward the churchyard as if seeking protection from the stones. "Because I saw that brooch once, not on the train." "Here." Poirot exchanged a look with Miss Marple. "Where did you see it?" she asked. "In the inn," he whispered. "The man with the case. He opened it last night to check something. I was bringing him towels. I only saw it for a moment." Poirot leaned closer without crowding the boy. "You are very brave to say this, but did he see you?" "I don't think so," the boy whispered. He closed the case quick. Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You did. Nothing wrong. You were simply doing your work." The boy nodded, relieved. He glanced at the ground again. "I didn't tell anyone. I thought maybe I imagined it." "You did not imagine it," Poirot said kindly. "Your eyes are sharp." Miss Marple asked, "Was anything else inside the case?" The boy hesitated again. I think there were letters, old ones." One looked torn. Poirot's eyes deepened in thought. "A torn letter. That is the thread." Miss Marple felt the narrative forming, drawing the village closer to the heart of the matter. She thanked the boy for his honesty. Poirot thanked him as well, placing a small coin in his hand. The boy's face lit with genuine relief. When they walked away, Poirot's voice lowered. "A torn letter. That explains the lady's fear." Miss Marple listened closely. "Fear often hides itself in sentimental things." Poirot nodded. "The brooch was sentimental, yes, but the letter may have been dangerous." They reached the path leading toward the old station. Weeds grew along the edges, brushing against the wooden fence. The tracks beyond held the faint smell of oil and old journeys. Miss Marple paused to study the discarded ticket stubs that always gathered here. Poirot stepped near a rusted bench and examined a scrap of paper caught beneath it. He pulled it free with gloved fingers. It was a small wrapper from a shop along the railway line, the same shopkeeper who had described the dent on the thief's sleeve. "So, he passed through here," Poirot said. Miss Marple nodded. "People often underestimate how much they leave behind." Poirot held her gaze. "This wrapper placed him closer than I suspected." They stood quietly, listening to the stillness around them. A faint breeze lifted the wrapper slightly. Poirot tucked it into his pocket with care. Miss Marple looked toward the village rooftops. He may still be here, Poirot agreed, and he may have reason to remain. They walked toward the lane again. Miss Marple considered the boy's words, the brooch, the torn letter, the dented sleeve. Each detail held its place. Poirot spoke thoughtfully. Letters reveal the heart. Jewelry reveals the hand. Together, they reveal truth. Miss Marple smiled. Many mysteries require two kinds of seeing. Poirot returned the smile. Then perhaps we make a good pair. They approached the village square. People gathered near the fountain, sharing small news. The world around them felt unchanged, yet Miss Marple sensed a subtle shift in the air, the quiet before a deeper truth. Poirot glanced toward the inn in the distance. Shall we visit him? Not yet, Miss Marple said. People reveal more when they think no one watches. Poirot lifted an eyebrow. You suggest patience. I suggest opportunity. Poirot considered this, then nodded. You are wise. I only watch, she said gently. Life teaches the rest. They parted at the square, each walking with slow purpose. Poirot headed toward the station road. Miss Marple moved toward the lane that led home. The village continued its soft rhythm. Children laughed, doors opened, pots clinked in distant kitchens. Yet beneath these ordinary sounds, the shape of the mystery grew clearer. Miss Marple felt certainty forming. The case at the inn held more than stolen jewelry. It held the echo of a story reaching far beyond the village, and that story waited for its next unveiling. Chapter 4. Threads in the Garden. Morning sunlight rested softly on Miss Marple's garden. Dew clung to the petals in small, shimmering beads. The roses leaned gently over their stems as though greeting her. A calm breeze carried the scent of damp earth. Miss Marple tucked her gloves neatly and began removing faded blooms. She enjoyed these quiet tasks, for they gave her space to think. The garden seemed peaceful, yet her thoughts circled the midnight express. They returned again and again to the border at the inn. A small gate creaked open along the lane. Poirot approached with his careful steps, hat tipped in polite greeting. He paused near the roses, admiring their soft colors. Miss Marple straightened and welcomed him with a warm nod. You keep a beautiful garden, he said. It does its best, she replied. Plants notice patience. Poirot smiled gently, as do people. Miss Marple returned to trimming a rose stem, and some notice purpose. Poirot watched her hands for a moment before speaking again. You think of our friend at the inn? I do, she said. He troubles the air somehow. Poirot folded his hands behind his back. He hides something. We agree. Miss Marple nodded. Yes. Their voices blended easily with the soft rustle of leaves. Birds perched along the fence, tilting their heads at the quiet pair. The garden held a calm that encouraged reflection. Poirot seemed to sense the value of this space. Miss Marple pointed her shears toward a nearby bench. Shall we sit? Gladly, Poirot answered. They settled on the bench, sunlight weaving through the branches above them. Poirot looked toward the distant inn, though it remained hidden behind several roofs. His gaze remained thoughtful. A torn letter, he said softly. Miss Marple completed the thought. And a stolen brooch. Poirot nodded. Two pieces of the same story. Miss Marple studied the rose bushes. The boy described the letter as old. Old letters, Poirot said, often return to trouble us. They return at inconvenient times, she agreed. Their conversation paused when young Tom Dewberry approached the garden gate. He carried a bundle of telegrams pressed neatly under one arm. He looked breathless, as though he had hurried. Tom gave Miss Marple a polite bow. Telegram for Mrs. Bartlett at the inn, he said. Poirot raised an eyebrow. You deliver them each morning? Yes, sir, Tom replied, though this one came with a strange mark. Miss Marple tilted her head. A strange mark. Tom opened the bundle and showed a small envelope. Its corner bore a faint smudge that resembled a thumbprint. It was uneven and oddly placed, as though made by someone in haste. Poirot studied the envelope closely. "Fresh," he murmured. "Made by someone, carrying something heavy." Tom blinked. "How can you tell, sir?" Poirot smiled. "By the angle of the print, my friend. A tired hand." Miss Marple noted the remark silently. A tired hand could belong to someone carrying fear or guilt. Tom added, "Mrs. Bartlett said the boarder was up early today. He asked if any messages had arrived for him." Poirot and Miss Marple exchanged a glance. "And had they?" Miss Marple asked. Tom shook his head. "Only this one, but it's addressed to her." Poirot thanked Tom and sent him along. The boy hurried down the lane, leaving small puffs of dust beneath his steps. Miss Marple leaned slightly forward. "You felt something in that envelope," she said. Poirot nodded. "It speaks of urgency, and perhaps arrival," she murmured. A soft quiet washed over the garden. Miss Marple trimmed a wilted leaf while considering Tom's words. Poirot watched her trim the leaf with neat precision. "He looked for messages," Poirot said. "Before any arrived?" "Yes," Miss Marple replied. "People often watch for answers while pretending to wait." Poirot considered this. "You believe he expects someone?" "I believe," Miss Marple said, "that someone knows where he is." The breeze shifted, brushing the rose petals lightly. Poirot stood and walked toward the far edge of the path. A shadow from an old cedar tree fell across him. He turned back to Miss Marple with a thoughtful expression. "May I ask," he said, "what you noticed the first evening he arrived?" Miss Marple looked toward the rose arch. "His coat," she said, "the dent on the sleeve." Poirot nodded. "And you think it matches our description from the railway shop?" "Very closely," she replied. "People often carry marks from their journeys." Poirot stepped back toward the bench. He lowered his voice. "Do you think he stole the brooch?" Miss Marple hesitated before answering. "I think he carries more fear than guilt." Poirot looked surprised. "Fear?" "Yes," she said. "Fear leaves a different weight in the shoulders." Poirot considered this. Quietly, "Then the letter troubles him most." Miss Marple gathered her tools and brushed some soil from her gloves. "The brooch may simply be the surface of the trouble," Poirot agreed. "The heart lies beneath." As they stood, Mrs. Price Ridley passed along the lane. She noticed them together and approached with brisk steps. Gossip seemed to cling to her like perfume. "You will not believe the latest news," she said breathlessly. Poirot and Miss Marple waited politely. "A gentleman arrived by the morning coach," she whispered. "Smartly dressed, asked for directions to the inn." Poirot's eyes sharpened. Miss Marple folded her hands. "Did he give his name?" "No," Mrs. Price Ridley said, "but he carried a letter." Poirot and Miss Marple exchanged another silent understanding. Another thread had entered the tapestry. Mrs. Price Ridley continued toward the shops, leaving the mystery fluttering behind her like a loose ribbon. Poirot turned to Miss Marple. "A visitor with a letter, and a boarder waiting for one," she said. Poirot exhaled quietly. "Then today brings movement." "Yes," Miss Marple said, "and movement reveals motives." Poirot gave a crass, slight bow. "I thank you for your time, mademoiselle." Miss Marple smiled. "You will find answers, I am sure." "With your help," he replied. She watched Poirot walk down the lane with composed purpose. The sun filtered softly over the path, warming the roses once more. A sense of unfolding drifted through the garden. Miss Marple stood alone for a moment. She listened to the breeze shifting the leaves. The mystery deepened, yet she felt no alarm. Patterns moved in their own rhythm. She returned to her roses, trimming one more stem before stepping inside. The day promised more clues, and she knew where the next would surface. Chapter 4. Threads in the Garden. Poirot walked down the lane with a steady rhythm, his polished shoes tapping lightly against the stones. Miss Marple watched him vanish around the bend. The sunlight flickered across her garden again. She sensed the day held further movement. She stepped inside to tidy her gloves, but a soft knock sounded at her front door. When she opened it, Dolly Bantry stood there, breathless, with a mixture of excitement and worry. Her hat sat slightly askew. Miss Marple invited her in at once. Dolly settled into the small parlor chair. You must hear what happened, she said. Miss Marple poured tea with calm hands. Something at the inn, perhaps. Dolly nodded quickly. A commotion, though they tried to hide it. Miss Marple sat opposite her. Start from the beginning. Dolly leaned forward. The boarder left his room early. Mrs. Bartlett told me he looked anxious. He asked about deliveries to the inn. She said only a telegram had arrived, but not for him. Miss Marple stirred her tea thoughtfully. Tom Dewberry mentioned the same. Yes, Dolly said, but there is more. She lowered her voice. He went outside and checked the side gate, twice, as though expecting someone. Miss Marple considered this. A meeting, perhaps. Or a warning, Dolly added. Miss Marple looked at her friend with gentle concern. Did he see you? No, Dolly said. I was across the road, speaking with Mrs. Hartnell. She saw it too. Miss Marple allowed a moment of silence. He watches for someone with urgency. Dolly nodded. Exactly. And then this is the strange part. He walked toward the back of the inn and disappeared from view. Miss Marple's brow softened. Disappeared? Yes, Dolly said. I waited several minutes. He did not return. Miss Marple set her teacup down. Then he found a reason to hide. Dolly shivered slightly. Or a reason to run. Miss Marple rose and moved toward the window. The garden beyond stood calm in the sunlight, yet she sensed the story pressed more tightly now. I believe, she said, that the letter Tom delivered to Mrs. Bartlett troubles him. Dolly blinked. But the letter was not for him. People often fear what does not belong to them, Miss Marple replied gently. Dolly wrapped her hands together. Do you think the letter mentions him? I think, Miss Marple said, that someone knows where he is. Dolly exhaled slowly. This is becoming a proper adventure. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Adventures seldom feel comfortable when happening. A faint knock sounded again. This time, when Miss Marple opened the door, Tom Dewberry stood there once more. He looked troubled. Miss Marple, he said quietly, could I speak to you a moment? Of course, Tom. Come in. Tom stepped inside and removed his cap. His eyes darted toward Dolly, who encouraged him with a kind smile. He cleared his throat. I went back to the inn to see if Mrs. Bartlett needed anything, he said. She asked me to carry some things to the storeroom. Miss Marple nodded slowly. Yes, go on. Well, Tom continued, the side gate was open again, and someone dropped something near the hedge. Miss Marple felt a subtle shift. What was it? Tom pulled a small folded scrap from his pocket. This, miss. She opened the scrap with care. It was part of an envelope, torn cleanly along one edge. The paper felt old. The handwriting, though faint, appeared elegant and looping. Where exactly did you find it? She asked. Near the back corner of the inn, Tom said, close to the place where he disappeared. Dolly leaned closer. Does it say anything important? Miss Marple examined the fragment. The words were incomplete, yet she saw enough to understand its weight. I see a date, she said softly, and a name. Poirot appeared at the open doorway before she could say more. He stepped inside with a gentle apology. I hope I do not intrude. You never intrude, Monsieur Poirot, Miss Marple said. Please join us. Poirot closed the door behind him. He noticed Tom at once. Our young friend looks troubled. Tom swallowed. I found this, sir. Poirot accepted the fragment carefully. His eyes narrowed as he studied the handwriting. This is part of the letter, he said. Dolly gasped softly. The torn one from the case. Poirot nodded. Yes. Miss Marple folded her hands. It broke free from the rest. Poirot considered her words. Or someone tore it off in haste. Miss Marple met his gaze. He fears the content reaching others. Poirot nodded again. And he fears the sender most. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Should I tell Mrs. Bartlett? Miss Marple placed a reassuring hand on his arm. Not yet, Tom. You have done very well. Leave the rest to us. Tom nodded firmly and stepped outside. Dolly rose. I must tell Colonel Melchett. This is police matter, surely. Poirot raised a hand gently. Not yet, madame. Police frightened men. Dolly settled again, chastened but still curious. Poirot turned to Miss Marple. "The letter fragment mentions a place," he said. "A small coastal town." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "And someone with a grievance." Poirot's eyes deepened. "A grievance strong enough to follow across counties." Miss Marple placed the fragment on her small table. "Then he does not hide from us. He hides from the sender." Poirot walked toward the window and studied the street. "Fear drives him, not greed." "Yes," Miss Marple agreed. "He carries too much worry for a thief." Poirot returned to her side. "Then perhaps the brooch was taken for protection." Dolly frowned. "Protection," Miss Marple answered softly. "Sometimes objects hold secrets as well as beauty." Poirot nodded. "The brooch may contain something, a compartment, a message." Miss Marple felt the idea settle neatly into place. "Then he took it because he could not let the wrong person have it." Poirot agreed. "A desperate act, yet not an evil one." Dolly exhaled. "Then the boarder might not be a villain at all." Miss Marple nodded gently. "Only a soul caught in trouble." Poirot slipped the envelope fragment into his pocket. "We must speak to him soon, before the sender arrives." Miss Marple looked toward the lane. "Mrs. Price Ridley said a man came this morning." Poirot's voice sharpened. "Then time is short." Dolly stood. "I shall not spread any gossip, not until this settles." "You are very kind," Miss Marple said warmly. Poirot straightened his hat. "We meet at the inn within the hour." Miss Marple nodded. "I will be ready." He bowed to both ladies and stepped outside. Dolly soon followed, leaving Miss Marple alone in the quiet parlour. She picked up the fragment one last time. The handwriting spoke of old wounds and older ties. She knew the story now sought its turning point. The garden outside remained still. The roses glowed softly under the afternoon light. The mystery continued its slow unfurling, thread by thread. Chapter 5. The Boarder at the Three Lanterns Inn. The Three Lanterns Inn sat warmly at the bend of the main road. Its windows glowed with calm morning light. Steam drifted from the kitchen chimney in gentle curls. The air carried the scent of warm bread and polished wood. Miss Marple approached with quiet steps. She observed the stillness of the porch and the absence of villagers nearby. People rarely gathered early unless news had stirred them. Today, the inn seemed to hold its breath. Poirot waited near the entrance, hands folded neatly behind his back. He greeted her with a slight inclination of his head. "I am glad. You are prompt, mademoiselle." Miss Marple smiled softly. "The morning invites punctuality." They entered the inn together. Mrs. Bartlett, the innkeeper, stood behind the counter, arranging fresh menus. She looked up, startled by their appearance. Her expression shifted through curiosity, concern, and polite welcome. "Good morning," she said. "You are both early today." Poirot offered a warm smile. "We hope to enjoy your fine hospitality." Mrs. Bartlett nodded, relaxing slightly. "You are always welcome." Miss Marple approached the counter and touched the edge of one menu. "You had a busy morning, I hear." Mrs. Bartlett blinked. "Who told you that?" "News travels kindly," Miss Marple replied. Mrs. Bartlett looked uneasy. Poirot noticed this at once. "You seem troubled, madame," he said gently. "Oh, it is nothing," she insisted. "Just a restless guest. These things happen." Miss Marple exchanged a brief glance with Poirot. They moved toward a small table near the far window. The room felt warm, yet an undercurrent of tension lingered. Mrs. Bartlett followed them with her eyes. A door near the staircase opened. The boarder emerged with cautious steps. He carried the same heavy case as before. His coat showed the faint dent Miss Marple remembered. The man glanced toward them, but avoided meeting their eyes. Poirot rose politely. "Good morning, monsieur." The boarder hesitated before answering. "Morning." Miss Marple observed his posture. His shoulders carried weight beyond the case. His hands tightened around the handle. He moved toward the door as if eager to leave. Mrs. Bartlett called after him. "Breakfast is ready when you are." He nodded quickly without looking back. Then he stepped outside. Poirot sat again, considering the man's hurried departure. "He flees something," he murmured. Miss Marple nodded, and carries too much fear for a simple traveller. Mrs. Bartlett approached their table. He has been unsettled since he arrived, she said. Barely sleeps, hardly eats. Poirot leaned forward. Did he receive a visitor today? Mrs. Bartlett shook her head. No one asked for him yet, but someone will, Miss Marple added gently. Mrs. Bartlett looked alarmed. Should I be worried? Not yet, Miss Marple assured her, but you may observe him carefully. Mrs. Bartlett hesitated before speaking again. He asked me to keep any letters safe. He said they matter greatly. Poirot considered this. He expects a message, or fears one. A brief silence passed as the sound of footsteps approached. Colonel Melchett entered the inn with brisk energy. He removed his hat and nodded at the trio. Mrs. Bartlett straightened at once. Miss Marple, he said. Monsieur Poirot, I hear there is talk of some trouble. Poirot rose politely. Only talk, Colonel. Melchett frowned. Talk often leads to reports. Miss Marple folded her hands neatly. Colonel, perhaps it is best to proceed with patience. Rash action may frighten an already frightened man. Melchett looked at her sharply. Frightened? Yes, she said. You may find gentler approaches more revealing. Melchett grumbled but accepted her guidance. Very well, but I shall keep watch. Mrs. Bartlett excused herself to attend the kitchen. Poirot and Miss Marple remained at their table. The inn grew quieter as the boarder's hurried departure left a faint echo behind. Poirot leaned closer. We must speak to him, but gently. Miss Marple nodded. Fear opens no doors. Kindness does. Poirot considered her words. Perhaps we begin with the case he guards. Miss Marple studied the door through which he left. He protects it with care. That means something inside matters deeply. Poirot tapped a finger against the table. The brooch, perhaps, but more likely the letter. She agreed. The torn fragment speaks of unrest. Poirot added, a grievance. And a past, Miss Marple said. A quiet moment followed. The inn's calm morning rhythms softened around them. Voices from the kitchen drifted lightly into the room. The world outside the windows remained still. Poirot stood. Let us walk after him. A frightened man may reveal truth in open air. Miss Marple rose beside him. But gently, she reminded. Always gently, he replied. They stepped out of the inn. The sunlight met them warmly. The boarder walked ahead toward the market road, moving with uneasy haste. Miss Marple and Poirot followed at a measured distance. The boarder paused near a small cart selling apples. He glanced around nervously, as though searching for someone. Poirot observed the movement closely. His hands shake, Poirot murmured. Miss Marple nodded, and his eyes searched shadows. A woman behind the cart offered the boarder an apple. He declined with a tight smile. He clutched his case closer and stepped away quickly. Poirot whispered, fear, strong fear. Miss Marple replied softly, he expects danger. They followed him toward the churchyard. He paused there, leaning against a low stone wall. His breath came unsteadily. He kept his eyes fixed on the path behind him. Poirot approached him with careful steps. Monsieur, he said gently, may we speak with you? The boarder startled. I have nothing to say. Miss Marple stepped forward with calm kindness. We wish to listen, nothing more. He looked at her with weary eyes. You do not understand. Poirot answered softly, then help us understand. The boarder swallowed hard. His fingers tightened around the case handle. He looked toward the inn, then toward the distant road, then finally at the two quiet figures before him. I did not steal anything, he whispered. We believe you, Miss Marple said gently. He blinked in confusion. You do? Poirot nodded. Fear does not belong to thieves. The boarder lowered his gaze. I am being followed. Someone wants what is inside this case. Miss Marple asked softly. The brooch? No, he said. Not the brooch, the letter. Poirot exchanged a quick look with Miss Marple. The torn one, Poirot said. Yes, the boarder whispered. It holds truth someone wants hidden. Miss Marple asked. And the brooch? He sighed. Used as a hiding place. Poirot's eyes widened. A secret compartment. Yes, the boarder said. I opened it on the train. Someone saw me." Miss Marple stepped closer with soft reassurance. "You are safe for the moment." He closed his eyes briefly. "No one is safe, not until this ends." Poirot touched the CD, man's arm gently. "Then let us help you." The boarder looked at him with fragile hope. "You would do that?" "Yes," Miss Marple said. "Truth deserves its day." The man exhaled slowly, the tension easing slightly. He began to open the case, but then paused. "Not here," he said. "Too many eyes." Poirot nodded. "Then we will find a quiet place." Miss Marple looked toward the path leading to the old station. "There," she said. "Few walk that way now." The boarder agreed with a faint nod. Together, they walked away from the churchyard. The case weighed heavy in the boarder's hand. Yet, his steps seemed lighter than before. Miss Marple sensed the story drawing closer to its center. The truth waited patiently, ready to step into the light. The path to the old station lay quiet under the late morning sun. Grass brushed gently against the worn stones. Birds called softly from the hedgerows. Their voices sounded distant, as though the morning held its breath. The boarder walked ahead with uneven steps. His hand gripped the case tightly, knuckles pale from strain. Poirot followed close behind, studying every shift in the man's shoulders. Miss Marple walked at the side, her pace steady and calm. When they reached the gate, the boarder paused. His breath came shallow and anxious. "This place is empty," he murmured. "No one will hear us." Miss Marple nodded. "That is why we chose it." They entered the old platform, leaves gathered in small piles along the pack's edges. The faded sign hung crooked above them. Its letters had worn thin with time. The boarder placed the case on a wooden bench. His hands trembled as he adjusted the latch. "I must show you everything," he said. Poirot folded his hands behind his back. "We are ready." The man hesitated. His eyes scanned the trees and the small shed at the end of the platform. Miss Marple understood his fear. She stepped closer and offered a gentle word. "You are safe for this moment," she said. He exhaled shakily and opened the case. Inside lay a small velvet pouch, a bundle of worn letters, and a folded shirt. He pushed the shirt aside and lifted the pouch with trembling fingers. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "The brooch?" Poirot said quietly. "Yes," the boarder whispered, "but not for decoration." He opened the pouch. The brooch lay inside, shimmering faintly in the spide light. Its design appeared delicate, almost fragile. Miss Marple saw fine scratches along the edge. Poirot noticed them too. "A hidden hinge," he said. The boarder nodded. "Press here." Poirot pressed the small point. The brooch clicked open, revealing a narrow compartment. Inside lay a strip of folded paper. Miss Marple saw it at once. "A message," she said. "A confession," the boarder whispered. Poirot removed the strip with careful fingers. He unfolded it slowly. The paper appeared brittle from age. Lines of handwriting stretched across it in neat script. The boarder stepped back. His breath trembled. "It is my father's writing." Miss Marple took in the gentle pain in the man's voice. "Your father," she repeated softly. The boarder nodded. "He died many years ago, but before he died, he sent a letter to someone, a letter that never reached its destination." Poirot studied the strip carefully. "This is part of that letter." "Yes," the boarder said. "The other part is inside the bundle." He handed Poirot the worn letters. Poirot opened them and compared the script. Everything matched. Miss Marple watched their expressions shift. "It speaks of a mistake," Poirot said. The boarder nodded. "A mistake that cost another man his reputation." Miss Marple listened closely. "And someone wants this truth buried." "Yes," the boarder whispered. "Someone connected to the past." Poirot read another line. "It speaks of money, of guilt. It speaks," the Hercule boarder said, "of the man my father tried to protect." Miss Marple folded her hands gently. "So the brooch was a way to keep the message safe." The boarder nodded. "My mother placed part of the letter inside it. She feared the wrong eyes would find the rest." Poirot considered this thoughtfully. "Then someone has been searching for this secret for many years." Yes, the boarder whispered. Miss Marple asked softly, "And you discovered all this on the Midnight Express?" He nodded. "My mother kept the brooch hidden. When she passed away, I found it among her things. I pressed the hinge by accident. I found the paper and searched for the matching letters." Poirot nodded slowly. "And someone followed you once you began your search." The boarder's voice shook. "Someone who knew the story better than I did." Miss Marple looked toward the distant road. "You saw Tem on the train?" "Yes," the man said. "He watched me. I recognized him from the town where my father once lived." Poirot lowered the strip of paper. "He wants the truth destroyed. He wants his family protected," the boarder whispered, "but not through honest means." Miss Marple took a slight breath. "And now he has come here?" "Yes," the boarder said. "I saw him this morning, near the coach stop." Poirot stiffened. "Then he will come again." Miss Marple nodded. "He will follow the case." They stood in quiet thought. Leaves rustled gently along the tracks. A distant bird cried out, breaking the stillness. Poirot closed the brooch carefully. "You must leave this with us," he said. The boarder looked startled. "But," Poirot raised a steady hand, "for your safety, you cannot carry this any longer." Miss Marple stepped forward. "We will keep it safe, and we will speak to Colonel Melkett." The boarder hesitated, then nodded with slow relief. Poirot continued, "You must remain at the inn, but take no risks. Answer no knocks. Speak to no strangers." The boarder swallowed. "I understand." Miss Marple added, "Mrs. Bartlett will watch you. She has a kind but steady nature." "Yes," the man agreed. "I trust her." Poirot placed the brooch inside his coat. "This truth will not vanish again." Miss Marple held the letters carefully. "Nor will fear dictate its silence." The boarder steadied himself. "Thank you, both of you." Poirot bowed slightly. "Courage, monsieur." Miss Marple offered a warm smile. "The worst is behind you." The man picked up his case, now lighter without the burden of secrets. He walked slowly back toward the village. Poirot and Miss Marple watched him vanish down the path. Poirot turned to her. "We must act quickly." "Got terriages?" Miss Marple nodded. "Before the seeker arrives at the inn." Together they left the old station. The wind picked up, brushing through the trees with purposeful sound. The mystery moved toward its next turn. Chapter 6. A walk by the old station. The afternoon settled gently over street, Merrymead. Soft shadows stretched across lawns and fences. A warm hush lay over the village lanes. Even the birds seemed to call more quietly. Miss Marple stepped outside with her shawl draped lightly across her shoulders. She walked toward the old station path, where the ground held the memories of many journeys. Each stone seemed to rest beneath a long history of footsteps. Today, the path felt expectant. Poirot waited near the tall hedgerow. He stood very still, studying the leaves with thoughtful eyes. When he saw Miss Marple, he tipped his hat. She joined him at a calm pace. "I trust you are ready for a small walk," he said. Miss Marple smiled. "Walks often reveal more than questions." Poirot nodded. "And this path may reveal much today." They moved side by side along the quiet track. The afternoon light filtered through high branches. Nearby, the old freight shed crouched like a sleeping relic. Its roof sagged in familiar weariness. Poirot paused near the shed door. "The boy mentioned someone here?" he said. "Late at night." Miss Marple nodded gently. "People pass through darkness with hidden purpose." Poirot examined the log. No break, but dust. "Disturbed." Miss Marple pointed. "A faint footprint." Poirot leaned closer. "Yes, fresh enough to matter." She studied the pattern. Heavy step, yet uneven. "Someone carrying weight," Poirot said softly. "Or carrying worry," she replied. They stood quietly, letting the afternoon breeze carry small clues to them. A faint scent of old timber reached their senses. The world seemed to hold still around them. Poirot straightened. "Our visitor from the coach may have come here. He would seek a quiet place," Miss Marple said. "Yes," Poirot agreed. "To observe without being observed." They continued down the path. A retired station master, Mr. Reed, appeared near the bend. He leaned on his walking stick, gazing at the disused tracks. His expression carried the weight of memory. "Good afternoon, Mr. Reed," Miss Marple greeted. He turned slowly. "Ah, Miss Marple and Monsieur Poirot. I hoped I might see you." "Something on your mind?" Poirot asked gently. Mr. Reed nodded. "Yes, something from last night." They walked with him toward a wooden bench. Mr. Reed lowered himself with a slow sigh. He rested both hands on his stick. The breeze lifted wisps of his grey hair. "I saw someone," he said quietly, "near the freight shed." Poirot exchanged a quick glance with Miss Marple. "At what time?" Poirot asked. "Near midnight," Reed replied. "I heard a soft sound, not quite footsteps, something lighter." Miss Marple folded her hands. "Did you recognize the person?" "No," Reed said, "but I saw the shape. A man, tall, moved with purpose." Poirot leaned slightly closer. "Did he carry anything?" Reed nodded. "A small parcel, wrapped in dark cloth." Miss Marple exchanged a brief look with Poirot. A parcel matched the idea of a message, or an object linked to the brooch's secret. Reed continued speaking slowly. "He went to the shed," Reed said, "stooped down, hid the parcel beneath the old crate." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "And did he retrieve it later?" "No," Reed said. "I left before he returned." Miss Marple spoke softly. "So the parcel may still be there." Reed nodded. "Most likely." Poirot stood. "We must look." Reed raised a hand gently. "Be careful." The man moved like someone with intent. Miss Marple thanked Reed kindly. Poirot offered a polite nod. They walked toward the shed again. The air felt heavier, now, as though anticipating discovery. Poirot entered first. Dust stirred lightly beneath his shoes. Miss Marple followed, careful not to disturb anything unnecessary. They approached the old crate Reed mentioned. Poirot crouched. He lifted the side of the crate slowly. Beneath it lay a dark cloth bundle. Miss Marple held her breath. Poirot lifted the bundle. It felt light. He unwrapped it with utmost care. Inside lay another letter fragment, slightly larger than the first. The writing matched perfectly. "A missing piece," Poirot murmured. Miss Marple nodded and placed. "Intentionally." Poirot studied it closely. "Someone brought this here last night," Miss Marple whispered. "Not the boarder, the seeker." Poirot's eyes deepened. He searched the inn, failed, then returned here. "Yes," she said, looking for the message's other half. Poirot folded the paper carefully. "He knows part of the truth is still hidden, and he fears its exposure," Miss Marple added. The shed's shadows wrapped around them. Dust drifted through a thin beam of sunlight. The quiet held a different tone now. Poirot rose. "We must take this to Colonel Melchett." "Miss," Marple agreed, "before confrontation arrives at the inn." They stepped back into the afternoon light. The breeze seemed stronger now. The trees whispered faintly overhead. Poirot looked at the tracks. "He may return tonight?" Miss Marple nodded. "Fear moves people in circles." They began, walking toward the village again. Reed still sat on the bench, watching them approach. His eyes held concern. "Did you find anything?" he asked. Poirot nodded. "Yes, something important." Reed sighed deeply. "I feared as much." Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on Reed's arm. "You did the right thing telling us." Reed nodded. "I only hope it helps." Poirot's voice grew thoughtful. "It brings the truth closer." Miss Marple added, "And truth brings clarity." Reed watched them walk away. The old station returned to its quiet. Yet something had shifted. A path forward now lay open. As they reached the lane, Miss Marple slowed. Her eyes drifted over the peaceful village. Children played. Doors opened. A dog barked near a gate. All seemed ordinary, yet she felt the hidden pattern tightening. Poirot looked at her gently. "You see something in the air?" "Yes, miss," Marple said. "The next step approaches." Poirot nodded. "And we will meet it together." They resumed their walk. Afternoon sun warmed the hedges. The village watched with quiet innocence, unaware of the truths moving beneath its calm surface. Poirot and Miss Marple walked toward the heart of Fies, the village, with measured steps. The afternoon sun softened the edges of rooftops and cast warm light across the lanes. People continued their daily routines without sensing the quiet urgency forming nearby. Miss Marple felt each moment gather purpose. Poirot held the recovered fragment carefully inside his coat. His expression remained thoughtful and alert. He paused sometimes to examine the ground or the sway of a branch. Miss Marple understood these small pauses well. They meant his mind worked with deliberate precision. They stopped near the village green. A few children ran across the grass, laughing as they chased a hoop. Their bright voices contrasted with the gravity of the moment. Miss Marple smiled gently at their play, though her thoughts stayed with the mystery. Colonel Melchett approached from the direction of the post office. His stride was firm, and his face carried lines of concern. When he reached them, he removed his hat. "I received your message," he said. "What have you found?" Poirot glanced at Miss Marple. She offered a small encouraging nod. Poirot then withdrew the dark cloth bundle and opened it. Melchett studied the fragment inside. "Another piece of the letter," he said slowly. "Yes," Poirot replied, "hidden beneath a crate at the old station." Melchett frowned, placed there deliberately. Miss Marple added softly, "By a man who fears exposure." Melchett considered their words with narrowing eyes. "Then the seeker is here, in this village." Poirot nodded. "And he may attempt to retrieve what he lost." Melchett breathed out sharply. "We must find him." Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Not by force, Colonel. Force will corner him." Melchett sighed. "Then what do you suggest?" "We watch," she said. "People reveal themselves when they believe they are unseen." Poirot agreed. "We remain near the inn, quietly." Melchett looked unconvinced but trusted Miss Marple. "Very well, but I shall stay close." They parted ways for a short while. Poirot and Miss Marple walked toward the lane, letting the calm rhythm of the afternoon settle around them. A few villagers greeted them politely, unaware of the tension moving through the quiet air. Miss Marple slowed her pace. "The seeker will act soon." "Yes," Poirot replied. "He will come when the boarder is alone. He expects fear," she said. Poirot smiled faintly. "But he does not expect us." They passed the bakery where warm bread cooled on the windowsill. The scent drifted softly. A small group of villagers chatted near the door. Their words drifted through the calm air. "I saw a stranger," one woman whispered. "Tall fellow, looked unsettled." "Carrying a worn coat," said another. "Passed by the church." "And near the inn," added a third. Miss Marple exchanged a meaningful glance with Poirot. The description matched the seeker. Their steps grew slightly quicker, though still measured. When they reached the Three Lanterns Inn, Mrs. Bartlett stood near the doorway. Her face looked pale with worry. She hurried toward them. "He's come," she whispered. "The man you asked about. He arrived moments ago." Poirot's voice remained very calm. "Where is he now?" "In the dining room," she said, asking for the boarder. Miss Marple touched Mrs. Bartlett's hand gently. "Do not alarm him. Let him believe nothing is unusual." Mrs. Bartlett nodded, though her hand trembled slightly. Poirot motioned for Miss Marple to follow him to the side window. They approached quietly. The window stood partly open, allowing soft voices to drift outward. The seeker sat at a table facing the door. He wore a dark coat with dust along the sleeves. His face appeared lined with worry and determination. He tapped a finger restlessly against the table. Poirot whispered, "His manner matches the description." Miss Marple nodded. "And his impatience reveals his purpose." Inside, the boarder had not yet appeared. Mrs. Bartlett moved with steady grace to delay the meeting. She offered the seeker tea, which he declined. He leaned forward, gripping the table edge with tense fingers. Poirot murmured, "He is desperate." Miss Marple answered softly, "Desperation leads to mistakes." They stepped back from the window to speak quietly. Poirot said, "We cannot let him leave with the boarder." "No," Miss Marple agreed, "but we must avoid alarm." Poirot tapped a finger against his chin. We create a conversation, a gentle interruption. Miss Marple smiled. A calm diversion. Melchett approached them quietly. Is he inside? Poirot nodded. Yes. We must move carefully. Miss Marple placed a hand on Melchett's sleeve. Colonel, allow Monsieur Poirot to begin. The man will not expect. Calm conversation. Melchett agreed, though reluctantly. Poirot straightened his tie and entered the inn with measured steps. Miss Marple followed. Melchett remained near the door. The seeker looked up sharply when they entered. His eyes narrowed. Poirot approached him with warm civility. Good afternoon, monsieur, Poirot said. The man stared. Do I know you? Poirot smiled. Not yet, but I believe we share a concern. The man stiffened. I am waiting for someone. Yes, Poirot replied. We know. Miss Marple stepped forward gently. The border is safe. The man blinked. Safe. Poirot nodded. Yes, and he wishes safety for you as well. The man hesitated. His breath came unevenly. He looked toward the staircase, as if expecting someone to appear. Poirot spoke softly. You seek the letter. You fear what it may reveal. The man paled. You do not understand. Miss Marple's voice remained calm. We understand more than you think. Poirot reached into his coat and produced the folded fragment they found at the shed. The man's eyes widened. This, Poirot said, is the piece you hid. The man stepped back. You have no right. Miss Marple interrupted gently. We found it by accident. The man stared at both of them. Confusion and fear crossed his face in painful waves. Poirot spoke quietly. The truth seeks air, monsieur. It does not wish to remain buried. The man's voice cracked. You do not know what it will do. Miss Marple touched the table lightly. Truth rarely destroys the innocent. The man's shoulders trembled. He sank slowly into the chair. His voice lowered. I wanted to protect my family. Poirot sat across from him. From an old mistake. Yes, the man whispered. Miss Marple nodded. Softly. But fear carried you too far. The man lowered his head. I followed him. I watched him. I needed to know if he found the letter. Poirot folded his hands. He found part, but he does not seek revenge. He seeks understanding. The man exhaled a long, shuddering breath. I feared he would blame us. Miss Marple shook her head gently. Pain shared does not always lead to blame. Melchett stepped forward but remained silent. The air in the room softened. Poirot said quietly, Sit with us. Speak openly. Let the weight lift. The man nodded slowly. His fear began to ease. His hands relaxed. The tightness in his face softened. Mrs. Bartlett approached with a fresh pot of tea. She poured for each of them, her movements steady and kind. The seeker wrapped his hands around the warm cup. For a long moment, no one spoke. The quiet filled with possibility instead of threat. Poirot glanced at Miss Marple. She offered him a gentle nod. The pattern had shifted. Truth stood closer now, waiting to be assembled. The man looked up at last. I will tell you everything, he said softly. Good, Miss Marple replied. Begin where the wound began. Outside, a breeze moved. Through the inn's hanging sign, the gentle creak echoed through the calm afternoon. Chapter 7. The case opens. The early evening light settled gently over Street Mary Mead. Lamps flickered awake in cottage windows. The air carried the faint scent of warm suppers and trimmed hedges. A soft hush wrapped the village, as if preparing it for what must follow. Miss Marple walked toward the Three Lanterns Inn with steady steps. The sun dipped low and long shadows stretched across the road. She sensed the next turn in their story approaching. The truth seemed close, like a whisper waiting for breath. Poirot waited near the porch, hat held lightly in one hand. His expression appeared thoughtful, yet calmer than before. He greeted Miss Marple with a graceful nod. His eyes reflected the soft glow of the evening lamps. You received Melchett's message, he said. Yes, Miss Marple replied. He sounded concerned. Poirot sighed. Concerned and impatient, he wishes resolution. Miss Marple smiled gently, as many do when mystery unsettles the quiet. They stepped inside the inn. The room felt warm with lamplight, yet carried a thick undercurrent of tension. A few villagers sat at distant tables, speaking in careful murmurs. Mrs. Bartlett moved among them with steady hands and alert eyes. Colonel Melchett stood near the hearth. He straightened when he saw them. "We are ready to speak with the two men," he said. Poirot lowered his hat. "Let us proceed." "With calm." Melchett nodded reluctantly. "Calm, if possible." Mrs. Bartlett guided them toward a private corner. Two chairs sat there, placed close together. The boarder occupied one. The seeker sat in the other. Both looked tired, though for different reasons. Miss Marple approached with quiet compassion. "Good evening," she said. The boarder lifted his eyes, grateful to see her. The seeker avoided her gaze at first, but guilt softened his posture. Poirot remained standing for a moment, studying the pair with balanced attention. His presence carried a gentle authority that steadied the room. Melchett began briskly. "We must understand the full matter." Poirot raised a hand. "Gently, Colonel. Let them speak in their own time." The boarder inhaled slowly. "I will begin," he said. The seeker nodded, resigned. Miss Marple folded her hands. "Start from what you discovered," she said. The boarder looked at his clasped fingers. "When I opened the brooch, I did not know what I would find, only that my mother spoke of things unsaid." Poirot nodded encouragingly. "And so you read the fragment?" "Yes," he said. "I found my father's regret, words meant for someone he wronged." The seeker shifted uncomfortably. His voice trembled. "The man he wronged was my uncle." Miss Marple offered him a gentle look. "Then this is where your paths meet." The seeker lowered his head. "My family suffered deeply. Rumors, suspicion, everything fell upon my uncle. And Decidi ad siling too." Poirot stepped closer. "But your father," he said to the boarder, "tried to confess." "Yes," the boarder replied. "He planned to send the letter, but illness took him. My mother hid it, fearing the consequences." The seeker clenched his jaw. "My uncle died believing the world thought him guilty." The boarder's face tightened with sorrow. "I am sorry for his pain." Miss Marple saw the truth in both men's expressions. The past weighed on them like years of unspoken grief. She spoke softly. "Pain passed down through silence becomes heavier," she said. "But truth, when shared, can lighten the burden." The seeker's hands trembled. "I followed him because I feared he would use the letter against us." Poirot shook his head gently. "You feared shadows, monsieur, not intentions." "Yes," the man whispered. The boarder opened his case with slow, steady movements. The velvet pouch lay inside as before. Beside it rested the remaining letters. He placed the letters on the table. "These show the full truth," he said. "My father regretted the harm. He intended to clear your uncle's name." The seeker stared at the letters for several moments. Then he reached forward with hesitant hands. His fingers brushed the edges as though touching something fragile. Miss Marple watched carefully, noting the softened lines in his face. Sorrow had replaced fear. Poirot sat down across from them. The brooch's hidden compartment held the confession, but someone else discovered its existence. The seeker nodded. "I saw him open it on the train." "And you followed him?" Miss Marple said. "Yes," the man replied. "I feared the wrong truth would surface." Poirot tilted his head. "You mean you feared blame?" "Yes," the seeker whispered. "And shame." Miss Marple's voice remained warm. "Shame grows when truth is hidden, not when truth is shared." The seeker looked up at her, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. His shoulders eased. "I could not carry the past any longer." "You need not," she said softly. Poirot leaned back slightly. "You both deserve clarity and understanding." Colonel Melchett cleared his throat. "There will be no charges," he said. "The matter belongs to past hands." The boarder exhaled deeply, a weight seeming to lift from him. "Thank you," he said quietly. The seeker nodded. "We both sought protection, not harm." "Izzy Trime." Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on the table. "Then let this be the moment where the past finds rest." Poirot looked to the seeker. "Your uncle's name will be cleared." The man nodded, tears slipping silently down his cheek. Mrs. Bartlett approached with a pot of warm tea. She poured with calm grace. The simple act brought comfort back into the room. The two men accepted their cups with quiet gratitude. Poirot rose and addressed them gently. "This evening, peace begins its return." Miss Marple nodded. "The village will breathe easier." The boarder carefully closed his case. It no longer seemed heavy. The seeker looked at the letters again with softened clarity. The room seemed to warm further, as though burden had finally given way to truth. Miss Marple stood with graceful composure. She offered each man a small, kind smile. "You have both carried enough," she said. "Let the rest unfold in gentler hands." Outside, evening settled fully across Street Mary Mead. Lamps glowed like tiny beacons. The roads lay quiet, holding the calm hum of restored balance. Poirot stepped beside Miss Marple as they moved toward the door. "You handle hearts with far more skill than many detectives," he said softly. She smiled. "People reveal their hearts when someone listens kindly." Poirot nodded with deep respect. "A most valuable gift." They stepped outside, letting the cool air brush against them. The night carried the promise of further reflection. The truth had emerged, yet more awaited in the final weaving. The evening deepened gently around the inn. A soft glow settled along the porch rail, shaped by the warm lamps inside. Miss Marple and Poirot remained near the doorway for a few quiet moments. The air held the faint scent of cooling earth. Miss Marple looked back inside. The two men sat close together, no longer on opposite sides of fear. Their shoulders carried less weight now. Mrs. Bartlett moved between tables with renewed ease. Poirot folded his hands behind his back. "It is remarkable," he said softly, "how truth can soften the hardest expression." Miss Marple nodded. "People often brace against harm that never comes." Poirot smiled faintly. "And release themselves only when someone speaks gently." "Gently," Miss Marple agreed, "is often the key." Colonel Melchett stepped outside, closing the door carefully. His voice lowered to match the quiet evening. "I believe we have avoided a worse trouble," he said. Poirot nodded. "Yes, Colonel, you handled the moment with restraint." Melchett grunted. "Restraint does not come naturally." Miss Marple smiled warmly. "Wisdom rarely does." Melchett tipped his hat and headed down the road. Poirot watched him disappear around the bend. He then turned to Miss Marple. "Shall we walk a little?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "The air could use a moment to settle." They moved through the village square at a slow, reflective pace. A few late lamps glowed behind curtains. The gentle rhythm of evening rested lightly upon the cottages. A dog barked once and fell quiet again. Miss Marple folded her hands. The seeker's fear ran deep. Poirot nodded. "A man can be driven far by fear for his family, and farther still by guilt," she added. Poirot agreed. "Guilt makes even truth seem dangerous." They paused near the green. A slight breeze stirred the grass. The night pressed softly around them. Miss Marple breathed in the calm. Poirot looked toward the sky. "You saw the path long before the rest of us," he said. I probe. "Only watched people," she replied. "Patterns reveal themselves when you wait." Poirot smiled. "And you wait with great patience." Miss Marple's eyes brightened gently. "It is a habit of age." They resumed walking. The lamplight created faint pools of warmth along the road. Poirot spoke again. "You said earlier that fear leaves weight in the shoulders," he said. "I noticed that. The boarder carried that weight heavily." Miss Marple nodded. "A man hiding truth always bends slightly." Poirot chuckled softly. "And a man pursuing truth stands too straight." "Yes," she replied. "Both positions reveal tension." A moment of silence followed. The night breathed softly around them. Miss Marple studied Poirot with gentle amusement. "You observed something else tonight," she said. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Ah, and what do you believe I observed?" Miss Marple smiled politely. "You watched how the two men looked at the letters, not at each other." Poirot paused. "Yes, That is true. They carried the same pain, she said. Poirot nodded slowly, and the same desire to lay it down. They reached a narrow lane lined with rose bushes. The flowers glowed faintly in the dim light. Miss Marple paused beside them. Poirot studied her expression. "You think the matter is nearly resolved?" he said. "Nearly," she replied, "but something small remains." Poirot leaned closer. "Something small?" "Yes," Miss Marple said calmly. "Something human." Poirot waited. Miss Marple continued walking, guiding him gently with her pace. "The boarder is relieved," she said, "but relief can carry aftershocks." Poirot considered this. He may still fear uncertainty. Miss Marple nodded. "And the seeker may feel shame." Poirot sighed. "Ah, shame is slow to fade. Rimaschi teg send." They walked past the post office, now darkened except for one faint light near the back. Miss Marple stopped. "The letter," she said quietly. Poirot frowned. "Which letter?" "The one Tom brought to Mrs. Bartlett," Miss Marple said. "The one the boarder believed might concern him." Poirot tilted his head thoughtfully. "Yes, it troubled him greatly." Miss Marple nodded. "We must know what it contains. Its meaning may complete the pattern." Poirot straightened with purpose. "We ask Mrs. Bartlett." "Not tonight," Miss Marple said softly. "Tonight she needs rest." Poirot smiled. "Ah, yes, always the kindness," Miss Marple replied. "The truth remains patient." They reached her garden gate. The village lay in comfortable quiet. Not a single curtain stirred. Poirot lingered. "This mystery surprises me," he said. Miss Marple smiled. "Because it carries no villain." Poirot nodded. "Yes, only wounded hearts." "And wounded hearts," she said gently, "are not solved through accusation." Poirot bowed his head slightly. "I have learned much from you." Miss Marple's eyes warmed. "And I from you." Poirot stepped back onto the lane. "Tomorrow we speak with Mrs. Bartlett." "Yes," she said. "Tomorrow." He paused once more. "Mademoiselle Marple, you guided the matter with remarkable grace." She looked at him with soft humor. "I guided nothing. People simply found their way." He nodded. "Perhaps, but you made the way gentler." Poirot tipped his hat, then walked down the lane with his steady, thoughtful stride. Miss Marple watched until he vanished round the curve. The night felt peaceful, though not yet complete. She entered her cottage and lit a small lamp. Her knitting rested where she had left it. She touched the yarn lightly, then sat, with a reflective breath. Tomorrow would bring the final threads of truth. The letter would speak its piece. The story would settle into its rightful shape. Outside, the village rested beneath a calm sky. The truth moved softly through its lanes, waiting for gentle hands to place it where it belonged. Chapter 8. The Shared Conclusion. Morning sunlight drifted over Street Mary Mead with a soft golden glow. It touched the rooftops gently, as though the village rested beneath a warm hand. The air held the calm scent of polished wood and early tea. A quiet certainty hovered, ready for the final threads to settle. Miss Marple stepped outside with slow, thoughtful steps. The evening's reflections lingered within her, yet the morning felt lighter. She walked toward the vicarage garden, where she had arranged to meet Poirot. Dew shone on the grass like tiny silver beads. The vicarage gate stood open. Griselda moved about the lawn with cheerful energy. She carried a tray of warm cake slices, steam rising faintly from the fresh-baked edges. When she saw Miss Marple, she brightened further. "Good morning," she said warmly. "You must both try the new recipe." Miss Marple smiled. "Your cakes are always a welcome comfort." Griselda laughed. "Comfort is needed today, I think." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, a gentle morning suits the moment." Poirot appeared from the far side of the garden. He walked with measured grace, adjusting his cuffs with practiced ease. When he saw Miss Marple, he offered a polite bow. "Mademoiselle Marple," he said, "the day begins beautifully." "It does," she replied, perhaps ready to close its last chapter. Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, always with the poetic touch." Miss Marple eyed him calmly. "You say that as though unsure." "I am sure," Poirot said. "Entirely sure." The vicar approached with quiet steps. His voice held its usual soothing warmth. "You are welcome to stay as long as you need," he said. "The garden bears witness to many resolutions." Poirot nodded. "It is a fine place for truth, Miss," Marple added, "and for reflection." They settled at a small table near the shade of an old apple tree. Sunlight filtered through the branches, creating delicate patterns across the tablecloth. Griselda poured tea with practiced care. Poirot placed the brooch and the letters on the table. The items rested quietly, no longer carrying fear. Miss Marple studied them with thoughtful calm. "We must speak with both men again," Poirot said. "Yes," Miss Marple replied, "but without strain. Their hearts are heavy, yet ready." Poirot considered this. "The final piece lies in the unopened letter." Miss Marple nodded. "Mrs. Bartlett still keeps it." The vicar looked surprised. "A letter," Poirot explained gently. "A letter that may resolve the last uncertainty." Griselda placed a slice of cake before each of them. "Then we must prepare," she said. "People speak with more ease after warm cake." Miss Marple smiled. "Your wisdom grows daily." Griselda laughed. "Perhaps I learn from you." Poirot took a small bite, then set his plate aside. His gaze drifted toward the inn, visible just beyond the hedge. "We should fetch the letter," he said. "Yes," Miss Marple agreed, "before assumptions take root." They finished their tea and walked together toward the lane. The morning light followed them like a gentle companion. As they approached the inn, Mrs. Bartlett stood at the doorway, her apron freshly tied. "Good morning," she said, though her voice carried mild unease. Poirot bowed. "Madame, we hope to trouble you only briefly." Mrs. Bartlett folded her hands. "Is it about the letter?" Miss Marple nodded softly. "Yes, if you still have it." Mrs. Bartlett reached into her apron pocket and withdrew the envelope. She held it carefully, as though afraid it might break. "I did not open it," she said. "We are grateful," Poirot replied. Miss Marple examined the envelope. It bore the lavender scent, the postmistress noted. The handwriting appeared delicate but decisive. She lifted her eyes to Mrs. Bartlett. "You say no one else has asked for it?" "No," Mrs. Bartlett said, "but the boarder looked unsettled when he heard of its arrival." Poirot nodded gently. "Because he feared news from the past." Miss Marple turned the envelope over once more, then handed it back to Mrs. Bartlett. "Would you please call them both?" "Mrs." Bartlett nodded and stepped inside. Poirot spoke softly. "This letter may clarify everything, or ease what remains unsettled," Miss Marple added. A few minutes later, the boarder and the seeker stepped into the dining room. Their expressions held caution, but not hostility. Mrs. Bartlett placed the letter on the table and withdrew quietly. Poirot gestured toward the envelope. "This was delivered yesterday morning." The boarder swallowed. "For me, no," Miss Marple said gently. "For Mrs. Bartlett. But concerning you," the seeker's face tightened with worry. "Concerning him," Miss Marple nodded. "Yes." Poirot encouraged the boarder. "Open it, monsieur. The truth waits inside." The man hesitated, then tore the top carefully. A folded sheet slipped free. He unfolded it slowly and began to read. His eyes moved across the words with growing astonishment. Miss Marple watched his shoulders soften. Poirot observed the change closely. At last, the man exhaled deeply. "It is from my cousin," he said. "She found something among my mother's belongings." Poirot leaned in. "Something important?" "Yes," the boarder replied. "Something my mother never told me." Miss Marple spoke softly. "What does it say?" The boarder lifted his gaze. "She wanted my father's confession shared openly. She wrote letters to both families, but illness kept her from sending them." The seeker's eyes widened. "She meant to clear my uncle's name." "Yes," the boarder said. "Long ago." Miss Marple smiled gently. "Then the truth has waited patiently." Poirot nodded. "And now it arrives." The two men looked at each other not as adversaries, but as people carrying the same weight. The boarder extended the letter toward the seeker. "It belongs to your family as—" "Well," he said. The seeker accepted it with trembling hands. "Thank you," he whispered. Poirot stepped back with quiet satisfaction. Miss Marple watched as the tension between the men eased into something gentler. Mrs. Bartlett approached with cautious hope. "Is it good news?" Miss Marple nodded. "It is healing news." The inn seemed to brighten. The sunlight through the windows grew warmer. Even the quiet hum of the dining room felt lighter. Poirot placed a gentle hand on the boarder's arm. "You have carried this burden alone for too long." The seeker nodded in agreement. "And I carried suspicion too long." Miss Marple folded her hands. "Truth often asks to be shared. Today it was." They all stood quietly for a moment, letting the room settle around them. The morning wrapped itself in a gentle sense of closure. Poirot turned to Miss Marple. "There is nothing left hidden now." Miss Marple smiled. "Only reflection remains." Together they walked back toward the vicarage garden, ready for the final understanding. Poirot and Miss Marple walked slowly back toward the vicarage, allowing the calm morning to settle around them. The sunlight grew warmer as they passed the quiet gardens. Birds moved across hedges with small, purposeful flights. The village seemed to breathe in a gentler rhythm. Poirot carried himself with lighter steps than before. The brooch and letters no longer weighed heavily in his coat. Miss Marple noticed the change with quiet satisfaction. Resolution always softened even the most structured posture. They reached the vicarage gate where the vicar tended to a patch of herbs. He looked up with a warm smile. "You both look more at ease," he said. Poirot returned the smile. "A story has found its ending." Miss Marple nodded. "And hearts have found their rest." The vicar stepped aside. "Come inside. Griselda has prepared something warm." The dining room welcomed them with a soft glow and the gentle scent of tea. Griselda moved with bright energy, arranging plates of warm scones on the table. She greeted them with cheerful curiosity. "Well," she said, "you both seem to have solved something rather important." Poirot chuckled softly. "Solved is a generous word, madame." Miss Marple smiled. "We simply helped truth find its way home." Griselda shook her head. "You make it sound so effortless." The C8. They gathered around the table. The vicar poured tea into delicate cups. Poirot lifted his with appreciative care. Miss Marple took a small sip before speaking. "The letter completed the story," she said. Poirot nodded and removed the last fear. Griselda leaned forward. "Was it difficult for them to hear?" Miss Marple answered gently. "Truth heals more often than it harms." They sat in peaceful silence for a few moments, letting the warm atmosphere settle. Through the window, sunlight painted soft patterns across the garden path. Poirot glanced toward the sky with quiet reflection. "At times," he said, "I forget how gentle resolutions can feel." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Perhaps because your work often faces sharper edges." Poirot smiled. "You, mademoiselle, soften those edges without anyone noticing." Miss Marple folded her hands. "Observation often works best when unnoticed." The vicar listened with quiet admiration. "It is a rare gift," he said. Poirot nodded. "I have come to value it greatly." Griselda stood and retrieved a small plate. "There is one more scone," she said. "Who needs it most?" Poirot laughed softly. "A detective must keep his strength," Miss Marple added. "But a gardener requires energy too." Griselda placed the scone between them. "Then share it." They split the scone with an ease that reflected their growing camaraderie. Poirot examined the crumbs with playful precision. Miss Marple watched him with soft amusement. After a moment, Poirot cleared his throat. "Mademoiselle Marple," he said, "I have learned much from this village." She smiled warmly. "Street Mary Mead teaches quietly." Poirot nodded. "And reveals truth in small moments." "Yes," she replied, "often through simple kindness." He grew thoughtful. "You have shown me that patience can be as sharp as logic." Miss Marple chuckled gently. "And you have shown me that logic may be softened by compassion." The vicar rose and stretched his arms. "I believe this morning marks a peaceful turning," he said. Griselda agreed. The air feels lighter. Poirot stood as well. There is only one matter left for us. Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. Only one. Poirot pointed toward the brooch resting on the table, its rightful home. Miss Marple lifted the brooch with gentle hands. The small hinge felt smooth now, no longer a hiding place but a symbol of truth. The sunlight caught its surface and made it shimmer softly. It should return to the border, she said. Poirot nodded. He may choose its future. The vicar added, perhaps he will keep it as a reminder. Griselda smiled. Or pass it to someone who needs its lesson. Miss Marple placed the brooch back in its velvet pouch. Either way, she said, it should no longer hold secrets. Poirot agreed. Secrets create shadows, and shadows, Miss Marple said, trouble the heart. They prepared to leave the vicarage garden. Poirot thanked the vicar and Griselda warmly. Miss Marple offered her gentle gratitude as well. They walked together toward the inn, though without urgency. The day held no tension now. The rhythm of the village resumed its steady balance. When they reached the Three Lanterns Inn, the Parity Dock door stood open. Mrs. Bartlett was inside, polishing a row of glasses. She looked up with hopeful eyes. "Good morning again," she said. Poirot approached her with a warm smile. "We bring something for our friend," Miss Marple added, a piece of his past, now at rest. The boarder and the seeker sat near the window, speaking quietly. Their voices held calm understanding instead of fear. When they saw Miss Marple and Poirot, they stood respectfully. Poirot placed the brooch on the table. "This belongs with you," he said. The boarder accepted it with gentle hands. "Thank you. I will keep it safe." The seeker nodded. "It no longer divides us." Miss Marple stepped closer. "Let it remind you both of truth shared." The boarder smiled softly. "It will." The inn warmed again with a sense of renewed peace. Mrs. Bartlett brought tea for everyone. Conversation flowed in. Soft, reflective tones. The two men spoke not of fear, but of next steps. Poirot leaned toward Miss Marple. "This is a good ending," he said. She smiled. "A human ending?" "Yes," Poirot agreed, "one shaped by compassion." Miss Marple looked across the room, watching the gentle expressions on the men's faces. The weight of secrecy had lifted completely. The story had reached the calm place it sought. Poirot looked at her again. "You see people clearly, mademoiselle," Miss Marple replied softly. "People show themselves clearly if one listens." They left the inn together and walked the small path between hedges. The village glowed beneath the morning light. Birds fluttered overhead. Every corner held a sense of restored balance. At the fork in the lane, Poirot paused. "Our paths part here," he said gently. "Yes," Miss Marple replied, "but only for now." Poirot smiled. "Until another mystery finds us." Miss Marple nodded. "Mysteries travel far." He tipped his hat once more. "Au revoir, mademoiselle." "Good day, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot walked down the road with measured grace. Miss Marple watched until he became part of the warm morning light. She turned toward her home, carrying a quiet understanding in her steps. The story had reached its peaceful close. The village breathed easily again, and Miss Marple's knitting waited patiently by the window. And so, dear listener, what if Miss Marple and Hercule Poirot met at the Midnight Express draws to its quiet close? The candle's flame glows steadily again. Its light rests gently on the revealed truth. In Street Mary Mead, peace returns, and Miss Marple's knitting resumes. Each stitch reflects the tangled hearts of humankind. Until next time, dear listener, another secret fades by candlelight.